Thanks so much, Aaron. Okay, yes, this is a topic that's close to my heart. Not because I'm a lawyer, but because when a human becomes a person, it actually becomes a person inside the womb. And it's very loud. I'm getting a lot of echo. Is it possible to reduce the echo? And the womb is a place that's very close to my heart. Well, it's directly underneath the heart, but it's close to my heart because I was an obstetrician before. And I've been asked that many times, and the question of abortion and all that was an issue that I had to tackle many times in my past life. So today, I'm just going to talk a bit about starting off with Roe v. Wade. Okay, Roe v. Wade. How many of you have never heard of Roe v. Wade? Okay, well, actually, half of you have not heard of Roe v. Wade. Huh? That's interesting. Roe v. Wade is a very important landmark US Supreme Court decision that happened in 1972. And it was this person by the name of Norma McCorvey. Norma McCorvey is a regular US citizen, a lady. She was in her 20s then, but she went under the nickname of Jane Roe. As they go to court, sometimes when there's a high-profile case, they take on the nickname. So her name was nicknamed as Jane Roe, so she's referred to as Roe. And she brought a legal suit against the Texas government. Why? Because she wanted to have a right to abort her third child. She was having a third child, and she didn't want it. And so the Texas government was represented by its district attorney, Mr. Henry Wade. So therefore, the name Roe v. Wade was actually a woman against the Texas state government. And it said she was actually put up to it by two lawyers, Weddington and Coffey. It's nothing to do with a cafe that deals with wedding, but these two lawyers actually sort of looked for a lady that sort of promoted her cause, their causes rather. They wanted to promote feminism and as well as to promote the right to abortion. So they found this lady, Norma McCorvey, and with the name Roe, they filed a court case against the Texas government. And also, the court case was by extension to any other government or any other legislative body for that matter, that the government should not decide on the legality of abortion. For in doing so, would infringe upon the fundamental right to privacy. Now, this fundamental right to privacy is actually enshrined in the American Constitution, in the 14th, the 9th, and even the 2nd Amendment, according to the Constitution. And it infringes upon this right, or essentially any civil rights of any pregnant woman who decides on what she wants done with the body. It also implicit that the unborn child had also no civil rights or any other rights for that matter. So what happened then? The Texan District Court ruled in Roe's favor. But you know, as like our dear boss Koo, when he couldn't get past one court, he went to the higher court. So he was sent up for an appeal and he went to the US Supreme Court. So District Attorney Henry Wade appealed to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court also ruled in Roe's favor in a landmark 7-2 decision on January 22nd, 1972. That 1973, that's right, 1973. It started a court case in 69, and by 1973, almost 4 years later, there was this landmark decision. This landmark decision forced all state laws in the US. The US has 50 states, right? So it started with the Texas state that had anti-abortion laws. They repealed against these laws, and from Texas state, it spread to all the other 49 states, and all the 50 states in US had to amend the laws to make abortion legal for all pregnancies below 24 weeks gestation and available upon demand by the pregnant moms. And let me quote what the leading Justice Blackmun, delivery of his verdict on the state has, quote, an important and legitimate interest in protecting the potentiality of human life from the point of viability onward, but that prior to viability, the women's fundamental rights are more compelling than that of the state. What does all this mean? It basically means the Supreme Court's ruling is summarily based on the viability of the fetus and the mom's right to choose what to do with the body. It hinges on these two factors, the viability of the fetus and the mom's right to choose what she wants done for herself, including whether to keep the pregnancy or not. Okay, let's do a very quick survey here. How many of you think that the mom's right is more important or the baby's right is more important in response to whether to carry on with the pregnancy or to go ahead with an abortion? How many of you think that the mom's right is more important? Nobody. Why not? Yeah? Hardly anybody. Well, you think about it. Isn't the fetus improperly formed, immature? It's insensitive to pain. It's non-conscious of itself. It's totally dependent on the mom, and it practically sucks the life out of the mother every day, and absolutely unable to contribute even a teeny, weeny bit to society. Does it have a right to live then? Unlike the mom, who is a proper, fully grown up adult, an adult person. Now you begin to see the gist of that question. Sorry? You want to take a word again? Okay, who thinks that the mother's right is greater than the baby's right? As I said earlier on, it hinges upon two things: the fetal viability, the point of viability, and the mother's right to choose. But don't you think that the fetal point of viability is a moot point? Yeah? Look at what defines the point of viability of the fetus. Using everyday terms to describe what is primarily a medical definition in this instance, the point of viability is that one period in pregnancy, one point in time in pregnancy, when the baby can continue living independent of the mother. That means whether it's in the first trimester when the baby is brought out, can it live outside the womb? When the second trimester, can it live outside the womb? Or in the third trimester, can it live outside the womb? So when is that point when the baby can come out the womb and live independent? That is the point of viability. So according to medical statistics worldwide, it's about 24 weeks, just about 6 months, 5-6 months, plus minus 2 weeks. That is the cutoff point for the point of viability. But why take non-viability outside the womb at below 24 weeks as a cutoff point? It's not as if a baby less than 24 weeks that's about to be aborted has info leaked into it, like WikiLeaks, the info goes to the baby, and then the baby crawls out of the womb on its own accord. And since it would die anyway outside of the womb, so it's therefore justifiable to poison it, to expel it using chemicals, or even surgically evacuate or extract it. It can't be that simple, can it? Well, certainly not. It's not as straightforward, as there must be a whole lot of other considerations. Like some of those in favor of the mom's decision to abort are considerations of her own bodily rights. The mom has a right over her own body. That was what the judgment says, right? The mother has rights to choose what she wants. Her freedom and equality to choose how she uses her finance. The baby may tie her down. So she has a right to that freedom. And the general impacts of criminalization if abortions were not legalized. The poor mom. In those times when there were certain states that legalized abortion and certain states didn't. So if the mother wanted abortion, they had to travel cross-state at great expense, had to spend money, they had to pay for the clinics at those times when it's not legalized. So the mother had to spend money. And if she doesn't spend the money, she has to do it illegally, and a lot more money has to be spent. So the poor mother might be criminalized if abortion is not legalized. Sound pretty justifiable, doesn't it? But then, does the baby have rights to? On the other hand, some considerations not to abort, while favoring the baby, are just discrimination towards the baby's right to live. By actually allowing the abortion, you are discriminating the baby. You're saying the baby no rights, like it's minority, no rights, the majority has a right. So you're discriminating against the baby. You also deprive the baby of its future, and having also the mother may be having a religious belief that may consider it morally wrong. A biblical reference to it in Psalm 139 says this: "For you," referring to God, "created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was hidden from you when I was made in a secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." It speaks of something that is already planned, ordained, prepared for the future. But then, cutting through all the clutter is the fundamental question of the baby's rights. Does it have the same rights as any other adult person? When does the human baby becomes a person? Okay, just hang on to that thought for a moment, and she'll come back to it shortly. But just let us look first at the impact of this Supreme Court ruling. And it has become the most controversial judicial decision in the whole of US history, with some opposing it by asserting that it's a wrong legal decision, while the courts have failed to observe the moral and ethical aspects of abortion while respecting the civil rights of the mother. Others supported the ruling under the civil rights framework, said we should go further, and claimed that it could also include other human rights issues. This US Supreme Court decision has far-reaching impact across US and the rest of the world. In the US alone, the abortion rate rose about 80%. You can see a chart there. You can put the chart next. Rose about 80% to almost double from 1973 to 1980, peaking at 29.3 abortions per 1,000 women pregnancies. Of course, they're only women, no men pregnancies, right? Anyway, of childbearing age, until it peaked around 1980 to 81 there. You see that there at the top of it? And then it fell back again, fell by more than half through 1981 to 2017. And it came back to around the pre-Roe v. Wade figures. It didn't go below that. It hovered around the same figure, around that. Many other countries too, outside of US, including the UK, Europe, many African and Asian countries, and almost all Commonwealth countries, including Malaysia, our own country, amended their abortion laws to follow suit. In some countries like our own Malaysia, however, the abortion laws, although amended, still have strict criteria to prevent wanton, illegalized abortions upon demand. In other words, you cannot just walk into a clinic and say, I want an abortion for no reason. Whereas in US and the Western countries, you can. A pregnant mom can have easy, and not only easy, but assisted access, meaning the state will pay for the abortion at the drop of a pin. In the West, this ruling became a cause for celebration for the pro-abortion lobby, including activists and politicians looking for the popular vote. Under the civil and human rights banner, it also paved the way for loosening of many other laws via the right to privacy clause. This provision guarantees the right to freedom from arbitrary government interference as well as any other due process of law. And this included those concerning the same-sex relationships and marriage, gender equality, even to the point of gender assignment for the young. End-of-life issues like euthanasia and, of course, abortion at the other end, and biomedical ethics. It began in the 1960s and then 70s, and then it began to accelerate in the 80s and the 90s and steamrolled its way into the 21st century up to present day. We currently live in an era where truth has become relative, where individual rights take paramount importance and sentiments take precedence over reasoning. How does someone smart and intelligent, like all of you all here, make a stand and find a reliable reference point in these confusing times, the scenarios of shifting sands all the time? When does a human become a person? The right way, if you were to go through a blinding snow or sandstorm, is to return to the basics. Like, for example, relying on a compass with a true magnetic north, or even when the storm has settled a bit, to look up into the constellations in the sky and able to find your direction. You got to go back to basics. So as to cut through the clutter of various distractions, half-truths, and even lies that cloud over all these issues. And the main issue is being the meaning, the purpose, and the sanctity of life itself. We have to go back to the basic issue. To come back to the question of when does the human fetus acquire personhood? Traditionally, the concept of personhood would involve the soul referring to its existence both within and without the confines of the human body. And historically, the question has always been, when does the soul enter the body? Another way to put it would be, At what point does a developing human being, including the baby in the womb, develop personhood? It's another way of asking the same question. When does the soul enter the body? Why do I equate soul with personhood? I'm going to explain. While the two sides of the abortion debate agree that the human fetus is biologically and genetically human, they often disagree as to whether a human fetus is a person. The pro-life supporters, on one hand, argue that abortion is morally wrong on the basis that a fetus is an innocent human person, or that a fetus has a potential for life that will develop into a fully functional human being. They believe that a fetus is already a person upon conception. On the other hand, there are others that insist there's a distinct difference between a human being and a human person. They argue that while the fetus is innocent and biologically human, it is not a person with a right to life. Let me explain. In support of this distinction, some philosophers, sociologists, psychologists like Mary Ann Warren would propose a list of criteria as markers of personhood. She suggested consciousness, the ability to feel pain, self-motivation, self-awareness, and the ability to communicate and to reason as being the markers. And if anyone, any human being, having none of the 5 criteria would certainly disqualify as a person with a right to life. But Warren concludes that even a fetus has at least one criteria, which is the ability to feel pain, having a response to pain. Babies, by the way, can feel pain at some point in their life. They believe by about the 2nd trimester, before that the neurons are not well developed, but by the 2nd trimester, they can feel pain. You ask any mother, you poke the baby will move, okay? Right? Even from outside, all right? No, I'm not asking you to do it. Don't try. Any pregnant moms here. Okay, but she says the fetus is still not a person, and abortion is therefore morally permissible throughout the entire pregnancy. But hold on, it goes further. While there's an alternative approach that is to base the personhood on the right to life, on a baby's natural or inherent capacities, meaning using this approach, the baby essentially has a right to life as it has a natural capacity to develop the relevant psychological changes that will eventually make it a fully functional human being in due time. And since human beings do have this natural capacity, they essentially, babies that is, have a right to life, beginning at conception or whenever they come into existence. But Mary Ann Warren and her group of friends, or the same group that believes that humans may not necessarily be persons, would apply different psychological or physiological criteria, denying even a fetus from a right to life because it gives example like it lacks brain waves. You know, you can't measure the brain waves in the baby, or a higher brain function, or rationality, or even autonomy from the mother. And taking it to the extreme, Warren concedes that even infants, babies that are born, are not persons going by this criteria. On that basis, she and others, like the utilitarian moral philosopher Peter Singer, he's an Australian and is a world-famous utilitarian philosopher, concludes that infanticide, which is the killing of babies, could be morally acceptable under extenuating circumstances. For example, if the infant is severely handicapped or disabled. Let me tell you about one incident. On 22nd January 2019, the New York, next slide please, state legislation passed a law approving late-term abortion or induced abortion up to term, 40 weeks, or 36 weeks onwards is already term. Do we still wonder how this came about? Is it not a dismal failure of lawmakers to see that they have broken the moral law themselves? Let me explain to you. Let's go a little bit deeper. You're with me so far? Okay, let me explain a little bit deeper. Personhood theory with fragmented or Cartesian dualism. Wow, a whole mouthful of words, a lot of England there. Okay, basically, personhood theory talks about how a personhood is developed. Fragmented means broken. Cartesian comes over the Descartes. You heard of Descartes, a French philosopher, 18th century French philosopher? He talks about the need to separate the body from the soul. He talks about, you heard of the famous saying, you are what you think, right? So the mind is separate from the body being material, the mind being surreal. So he's the first one, even in the 18th century, talks about this. He divides the body from the mind and the soul. That's why you get fragmented or Cartesian dualism. Two things. How did this separation of human from personhood come about? It's about the doctrine of fragmented dualism that divides between a human being and the person. When I use the word doctrine, it sounds as if it's a learned subject or an ideology, but it's not. It's merely a worldview or perspective that many in our society have adopted unknowingly or allow it to creep in surreptitiously. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, you know him, right? He's a Christian German writer and theologian. He gave up his life to fight against Hitler's move in social engineering by implementing the laws of eugenics. Eugenics basically is to engineer a perfect race. That's why he exterminated the Jews, saying that they were the scum of the earth. And the blue-eyed, blonde, strong, white male is the perfect specimen of the human being. That's eugenics. And that was basically what Hitler was doing. That was what caused him to start World War II. And Bonhoeffer gave up his life for it. He calls this simply dehumanization or objectification, making humans like objects. Someone else, Nancy Pearcey, someone contemporary, she's an American social psychologist. In a book, Love Thy Body, uses the analogy of a two-story house. How many of you all stay in a double-story house? Almost all, right? Some of you stay in a triple or four, quadruple story, okay? But like a double-story house, 2 stories, upstairs, downstairs, okay? She uses analogy to illustrate the personhood theory. The house is divided into an upper and lower story. In the upper story is the person, you see on the far left, your left, where all the subjective and value-based and legal characteristics are found. Where all the higher intellectual and emotive functions are, is essentially where the soul is. You with me so far? Then the lower story is the human being, which is described as a non-person. And this is where the objective values, the lower sort of basal instincts, including materialism and existentialism, relating to the finite and material body, they exist and reside. The bottom line is that there's an internal separation between the soul and the body within the individual. The body becomes of little worth and becomes a material object to be used to achieve one's agenda and direction in life. You've heard of the saying, right? Love people and use things. Right? You heard of that saying, love people. The outcome and practice of fragmented dualism results in loving people and using things. Loving things and using people. It's an inversion of what we were originally and appropriately meant to be. To love people and use things because of the separation that we begin to find little worth in the material things, in the body, and putting separating the person from the body becomes an object to be used. So a body is a human being. So therefore, you use people and love things. The bottom line is there's an internal separation of the soul from the body within the individual. The body becomes a little worth and becomes a material object to be used. Abuse, therefore, of the body with harmful substances, with wild and uninhibited lifestyle, rise in human trafficking, inhumane treatment of workers, and loss of appreciation of the sanctity of life are most prominently seen at the both ends of life. Let me show you another diagram later. That will be later. Now, with the fragmented dualism, there is a loss of individual worth or identity. There is a hiding and a marring of the God-given image of himself the God identity in every human being. What the world, devoid of an understanding of God's precious promise and meaning to life, perceives is that the personhood depends primarily on a person's material or existential worth, like in the lower story of the house that we saw earlier in the diagram. The lower story has to support the upper story, right? Without the lower story, you can't have the upper story. So that lower story, the body, is only used to support the upper story. It is often measured in terms of degree to how a person integrates into or contributes towards a community or society. To a godless world, the sanctity or the preciousness of life is measured in the next diagram in the terms of worth. If this is worth and this is the age, you find that those two ends of age are of little worth, whereas those of the highest worth are the young, the energetic, the blue-eyed, the blonde hair, the talented, those with potential. That is of greatest worth when you talk about it in terms of fragmented dualism. But in the eyes of God, each human being is precious to Him, whether from whence life begins to when it ends on this earth. You can see from the next diagram that no matter whether the life is concealed in the womb at one end, again, this is the age and this is the human worth, or in the young or in the old, or even on the deathbed at the far end of life, that the life is equally precious and of worth to God. Why? Because we are all made in His image, bearing the potential to manifest God's characteristics, no matter whether we know it or acknowledge the presence of God in our lives at all. The Bible in the very first book, in Genesis, talks about this. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and female, He created them. That image or identity of personhood is extended even to the baby in the womb. Even the unborn child is remembered by God. Job, the world's penultimate sufferer, remembers God well in his book in chapter 10. Your hands shaped me and made me. Will you now turn and destroy me? And the prophet Jeremiah, the prophet to the rebellious and the stiff-necked Israelites when they were sent into exile, mentioned God saying this in chapter 1 of his book. Before I formed you in the womb, Israel, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. God understands humans very well because He is the creator. He also understands that we, in our rebellious states, tend to deny His existence and His sovereign purpose and meaning for our lives. So in order to restore this back into us human beings and to take care of the rebelliousness and disobedience, a price had to be paid. A price had to be paid. That price was paid for by the ultimate sufferer, Jesus Christ, God's own Son. I mentioned Job just now as the penultimate sufferer because he understood God's purpose. Jesus became the ultimate sufferer so that He identified as a human being. And as He does so, He identified you and I so that God's purpose and restoration of true personhood in all of us can be achieved. Romans 5:8 says that very well, but God demonstrates His love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. All that is required for this God-initiated divine transaction to be completed for you is a little faith. Faith to believe that this is exactly what God has done for you. Hence, the biblical or Christian worldview is holistic, whereby the body and the soul coexisted from the time of conception and are complementary to each other. They are not fragmented, but they are complementary. There is therefore an integrated metaphysical, psychological, as well as physical entity where spirit, soul, and body are an integral one. We always say that history comes around in a full circle in due time because human beings never learn. Most of us would have heard about June 24th, another Supreme Court ruling on June 24th this year. No? Have you heard about that? Yeah, it became world news, right? Those of you who have heard about Roe v. Wade would have heard about this other ruling where Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. It was on June 24th this year, the US Supreme Court ruled in a Rule 6-3 to overrule Roe v. Wade. Was it because the learned justices, there are always 9 of them sitting on the bench, was it that they finally saw that it was improper to disallow the wanton destruction of life in the womb, because after all, it is of worth and of sacred value? Not so. The opinion of the court, written by the leading justice, Alito, stated that Roe was, quote, egregiously wrong from the start, unquote, and his reasoning exceptionally weak. It also stated that Roe has, quote, inflamed debate and deepened division, and that overruling it would return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives, unquote. It all meant that this ruling was to suit the political and agenda, correct a judicial misdemeanor, as well as to an attempt to mend the divisions and rift in the social fabric of society. What has happened instead thereafter were widespread demonstrations and rallies linked to further inflamed sentiments. Such is the destiny of mankind that has chosen the path of fragmented dualism. No matter what you try to correct the wrong that you've done, it has already seeped into society. It is also a sign of rebellion against God. So in closing, I would like to invite you to explore further the purpose and the meaning of humankind's short sojourn on this blue marble we call Earth. I love to call Earth the little blue marble, as I see it as such from the Hubble telescope's perspective. That is only, after all, if you look at it and you expand it, it's only a small speck, and this is the Milky Way, in the whole vast expanse of God's marvelous cosmic universe. And it's so fine-tuned that for us to exist in this universe requires major shifts in cosmic powers, and yet we live and they are sustained for millions of years upon this earth. Our life here is still so short as a journey compared to the eternity spent with a loving God who's interested in our daily affairs and who longs for us to find our true personhood. And this meaning and purpose can be found in a restored personhood via a relationship with Jesus Christ. We have got time for Q&A after this. I would like to invite you, whether on site here or online, to ask any question or to clarify any doubt that you may have regarding this topic of finding true personhood. Thank you, and may God bless your time here with us.